Okay, welcome George Brown students and grads to the Dealing with Interview Stress and Sweaty Palm session that we are co-hosting with Discoverability. We're so glad to have you here. As a note, we are running this session live, so we will be responding to questions from students live in the session, but if you are joining us from the recording and you have any follow-up questions, by all means, make sure that you reach out to Discoverability or us and we can make sure that you get in touch with the appropriate contact. Before we get started, I'd like to do a brief land acknowledgement. George Brown College is located on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and other Indigenous peoples who have lived here over time. We're grateful to share this land as treaty people who learn, work, and live in the community with each other. We also acknowledge that land acknowledgements are not enough. We need to continue to learn, unlearn, listen, and participate in decolonizing efforts to make sure that we are all respecting the treaty that we have entered into with respect to each other. So with that, I would like to hand it over to our special guest today, Donald Sala, who is going to tell you a bit more about what he's going to cover today. Donald, over to you.
Oh, thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here in my living room with all of you this morning. My name is Donald Gusi Sala. I'm a program manager with the Ontario Chamber of Commerce in their Discoverability Network program. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Discoverability Network, you're going to learn a little bit more about it as I begin my presentation. And today I'm going to speak to you about interviews and sweaty palms and really just some of the maybe stresses or anxiety related to interviews and how to manage that. So I have a slide deck that I would like to share with you. Please bear with me a moment while I get it onto the screen. And I should note for our interpreter, I am aware that I have a propensity to speak rather swiftly. So if I'm speaking too quickly, please feel free to let me know. Okay. So you should see my slide deck full screen. Can Sophia or our interpreter, can you just give me a thumbs up because you're the cameras that I can see? Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so you see the title slide. I've already told you what it is. I'm going to explain the Discoverability Network to you briefly. We'll talk a bit about anxiety and job search, as well as strategies that you can use during job searching, and then we'll also talk about some strategies for when you get into a job interview, which is, of course, where you want to find yourself when you're searching for a job. The Discoverability Network is, oh, I see there's something in the chat. Oh, great. Thank you very much for putting that into the chat, Lacey. So the Discoverability Network is a free Ontario Chamber of Commerce program that facilitates connections between job seekers with disabilities and businesses in order to address workforce needs. So all of our services and supports are free to use for job seekers and for businesses, as well as all of our community partners and stakeholders. We operate an online job matching platform that matches candidates to open positions based on fit and preference for the roles. We provide free training on a range of disability and employment related topics, such as the workshop that you're attending right now. And we host networking events that bring all of our stakeholder groups together in order to make connections, share best practices and resources, build disability confidence, and support everyone's success. So we invite you to join the Discoverability Network. Please feel free to create a profile. If you have any questions, you're welcome to reach out to us and begin using it as one of the job search tools in your job search toolkit. Now then, on to the meat of the presentation, so to speak. We want to talk about job searching and interviews. There's a quote on the screen that you see, which I will read, and it says that job interviews are a highly autonomous, self-regulated, goal-directed, and proactive process. And that quote, I think, captures some of the intensity of the process that can lead to some of the anxiety that we feel. It's a pretty big statement there. And you see a list of some of the things that we may feel when we are searching for jobs. Uncertainty, maybe feeling overwhelmed with what we have to do, and the fact that we're dependent on only ourselves for it. Maintaining motivation can be a challenge because there may be few rewards. I mean, until you find a job or start getting interviews, really, it's going to be difficult to maintain motivation because there just isn't the same level of reinforcement. There's pain of rejection, right? Even if it's not personal. Most jobs we interview for, we're not going to get, and nobody likes rejection. And of course, self-identity, determining how to present ourselves and what we want to present of ourselves. So one of the considerations to make when searching for a job and to make sure that you're successful and able to manage the anxiety is your mental health. And there's some facts to consider, which is that unemployment, so not working or when you're searching for a job, has a negative impact on some health outcomes. And it's important to remember here that although it says unemployment, you can be searching for a job when you're already employed. So this can impact people who have a job. You might be in a job that you want to move on from, and so you're job searching even though you're employed. Stress and self-esteem play a role. Obviously, the stress of wanting to find the work you're looking for, not being certain if you're going to find something better or if you're going to get the jobs that you want, but also self-esteem with respect to those comments about rejection, which is a harsh word. But I don't think that is the best way to necessarily think about it when we don't succeed in a job application. But in the end, these are thoughts that may be going through our minds. We weren't hired, therefore we were rejected. Financial stresses and insecurity obviously play a role. If we're unemployed, there's no income, and that's just an obvious stressor. It may be that we're underemployed, right? I said we may be job searching even though we have employment, and it may be that we're just not making as much money as we need to or as we would like to have. Social supports and health consequences that increase with duration also play a role. Hopefully we have some social supports in place to help us manage expectations, as well as some, really people just act as sort of pillars of support for us in order to encourage us and keep us focused on the positives and the goal that we're pursuing. Because the longer the job search goes on and the more that we feel some of these stresses and anxieties, the greater the health consequences will be. So we want to manage our feelings, our expectations, be able to really sort of slow ourselves down, so to speak, and not become overwhelmed by these things. It's a bi-directional relationship when you're looking at mental health and unemployment. Good mental health is a factor in employability. It's a positive indicator of employability. So the better your mental health is, the more positive you're going to feel about applying to roles, the more favorably you're likely to present yourself in an interview, the more enthusiastic you're likely to be, and the more likely you are to present yourself in a way that is going to lead to potential job offer. Unemployment causes stress, which we've talked about, which leads to potentially depression, anxiety, lower self-esteem. And anyone who's experienced those things will know that it becomes harder to present yourself in an enthusiastic and positive manner when you're feeling those emotions or those negative effects. So we need to be able to manage them. So is there constant uncertainty during a job search? Again, you got a quote on the screen here from How to Deal with Job Search Depression from the New York Times, and it says the emotional and mental health outcomes of unemployment can create a feedback mechanism where the longer you go, the harder it is on your emotional health. The worse your emotional health is, the harder it is to find a job. And this can create what is called, or what could be referred to as a positive feedback loop. And what that means is a process that reinforces itself. So you are trying to find a job, you're not able to find one potentially in good time, your emotional health declines. That means you're less likely to present yourself well when you are trying to find a job or in an interview, and you find it harder to manufacture the motivation to look for work, which means it becomes even more difficult to find a job, which means your emotional health continues to decline, which again causes more negative impacts on your motivation and the way you're able to present yourself. And this process just continues to reinforce itself. So this is what we need to be aware of and manage and avoid or hopefully escape. The perception is that, and there's another quote, the perception that we are our work is a major reason job search and receiving constant messages that we aren't who we think we are is so distressing. I mean, you think of most of the conversations that you have with new people you meet, what comes up almost immediately is, what do you do? Whether you're a student or whether you're employed, what do you do is a core part of the conversations we have when we meet people. So it becomes a core part of our identity. And then to conclude this series of quotes, experiencing the unknown due to a perceived lack of information leads to uncertainty, which undermines an individual's ability to prepare effectively and efficiently for the future, thereby increasing the vulnerability of anxiety-related symptoms. So that is a wordier way of stating what I mentioned at the beginning, which is that positive feedback loop where you have negative experiences reinforcing negative experiences and perpetuating this process. So some strategies that you can use to improve your job search and your interview preparation. And this is important to consider because, like I said, most jobs we apply for, we're probably not going to get. And that's okay. That's the process of job searching. However, if we're prepared, we're more likely to feel positively about the effort we're making, even if we're not getting a job immediately, because we know we're prepared and we are putting the effort in and we're structured in our approach and consistent. So increase the intensity or effort, how much time or effort is put into the preparation. For your students right now, think about the amount of time and preparation you put into your projects, studying for exams, that sort of thing. Treat job search in the same way. Improve your interview content. So the activities and the quality of activities you're engaged in. So you can volunteer, you can go out and get certifications or badges for micro-credentials. LinkedIn has a host of free e-learnings, for example, that you can access, and these things will add to your resume as well as add to the content that you can speak about in your interview. And then maintain persistence, so continuity or change in the interview process. Things may be different from one interview to the next. You may be unprepared for some questions, but be persistent. Always be sure to answer questions. Don't feel like you maybe don't have the right answer. And if you're not sure of what you're being asked, request clarification. Request that the question be rephrased or reframed so that you can give the best answer possible. So we talked about, we're going to go into a little more detail here, increasing the time and effort you spend on the interview. So it's important to be kind to yourself. Finding work is difficult. 16 weeks, according to Workopolis, is the average amount of job searching time to find work. For myself, to use myself as an example, when I finished college and was looking for a full-time job in my field, it did take me, I don't know, about 3 or 4 months just to find a part-time job. And it wasn't the kind of job I was looking for initially. But I kept looking for full-time work, and it took me a year to find full-time work. Now, when I found it, I kept it, but it took quite a bit of time. So break things into steps. Make sure that what you're doing is manageable, so it doesn't feel so overwhelming. Right, smaller steps are easier to manage and easier to see your way through than large steps that involve many pieces of work that you have to do. Be compassionate to yourself. It's okay if you don't get a job right away. It's okay if you interview and are not successful. An unsuccessful interview is still practice for you, which means you're going to be better in subsequent interviews. And it is also experience for you in terms of being able to better anticipate what kind of questions you might be asked. And if you got the interview, that's also a good sign, right? You're getting interviews. And if you don't get an interview, that's okay too. You'll get it eventually. At least you are getting your applications out there. So be compassionate to yourself and reward yourself. If you're job searching, say you give yourself a schedule and you're job searching 15 hours a week, at the end of the week, give yourself some kind of reward. Go, read your favorite book in a park, or I don't know, have your favorite ice cream or whatever is reinforcing for you. But reward yourself, because job searching really is a job to a certain extent, and you need to put in at least a certain amount of time into it that would be equivalent to at least a moderate part-time job. And schedule things that can help thwart the stress before it happens. So time with friends, time with family, time to relax. Don't allow yourself to become overwhelmed, and spread your job search out throughout a week, right? If you're going to job search 15 hours a week, don't do 10 hours one day. Do 3 hours a day for 5 days a week or something like that. And yes, Lacey, you are correct. It is important to stay motivated and not burn out. And I'll take this opportunity just to let people know, if you have questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat or raise your hand. Certainly we'll leave some time for questions at the end, but don't feel like you have to wait if there's something really topical that you want to ask as I'm going through this content. So interviews, as I mentioned, are infrequent during a job search. It takes time to find a job. It takes time to get an interview. They're valuable experience, as I mentioned, regardless of whether or not you actually get a job after an interview, because you probably will apply to many jobs before you were invited to a single interview. So when you do get to an interview, you want to be prepared. And once you've had multiple interviews, you want to make sure that you're learning from the interviews you've had, the kinds of questions that you're likely to be asked, the answers that you've given, and how your answers could be better, or maybe where your answers are lacking and things that you can do in order to give yourself more content. So how can you prepare for an interview? It's a good question. Ask yourself, what should I expect for the interview, right? You can ask, should I say ask yourself, but you can also ask the interviewer. And certainly for some of these questions, it's quite reasonable to ask them. Find out what the length of the interview is, so you know how long to expect to be there. How many people are going to be interviewing you? Is it a panel interview? Is it a one-on-one interview? The format of the interview. Is it written? Is it verbal? Is it a combination of the two? Is it demonstrative? Is there a trial shift involved? And who are the names of the interviewers? When you are preparing for an interview, obviously you want to review the job posting, but when you're reviewing the job posting, you're looking for a number of things. Obviously, you want to know what's expected in the job, and you want to connect your experiences, examples from what you've done, to the requirements of the job. But you can also review the job posting to try and get a sense of what kind of questions you might be asked. You won't know exactly what you're going to be asked, but if you're reviewing the job qualifications, you can be certain, or the responsibilities, you can be certain that you're going to be asked questions that are designed to elicit a response from you that shows the interviewers that you have the skills or the abilities to do the job to perform the tasks that are listed in the job posting, right? That's really what they want to determine, is whether or not you can do the job. So the job posting is going to frame the content that they're looking for in terms of responses to questions during the interview from you. So prepare your answers to common questions. Why are you interested in this job? Why are you interested in this company? What experience do you have in this field? Tell me about a time when you were in a challenging situation and how you addressed that. Tell me about a time you had conflict with a teammate and how you dealt with it. These are all fairly common questions. So consider some questions that you're likely to be asked and have some answers and examples prepared. It's important also to research the company, the interviewers, if you have their names, and the industry that the organization is operating in. You'll probably be asked why you're interested in that organization, why you want to work in that field, so you should have a good answer. And showing that you know something about the organization means that you've done your research and your answer is more believable. And then have some questions to ask at the end of the interview. The most common conclusion to an interview is, do you have any questions for us? And you want to have something prepared. It's best not to ask about money and salary and benefits and that sort of thing. So rather than having those questions prepared, better to ask questions like, what would my first week on the job look like? What does job training look like? What is the schedule that I should expect to have to keep, and things like that. I always found that to be the hardest part of the interview. I see in the chat, and yeah, I can understand that. You want to have questions that are appropriate, and hopefully provide you with some insight. But also you want to try and have questions that impress the interviewer. So yeah, not easy, but certainly you can have some prepared. If you know anybody that you can do a mock interview with, that is great practice, especially if you know someone who's actually done interviews before. That's even better. And you may have friends who have done interviews, and by which I mean being the interviewer, but you can always go to someone like your parents or aunts and uncles who are perhaps have been in that position as well. And it's important that if you need an accommodation, you ask for one and explain that it will enable you to perform to the best of your ability and present yourself in the best way possible. I see a question, I think coming up with those great questions is key. Do you have some examples you mind sharing again? Yeah, so what I was just, to recapitulate some of the examples I shared, you can ask, what would my first week on the job look like? What is involved in the job training process? What kind of schedule would I be required to keep? If I was hired, who's going to be on my team, and what is my relationship to my team going to be? You can also ask, what your reporting relationships are going to look like, who your supervisor might be, and what your involvement with them is going to look like. And then Lacey has put a resource in the chat there, a link to the Career Services Center, which offers interview practice to help with that. So I will leave it there and move on. So what should you disclose during an interview? And then what do you disclose and when? There are some fairly straightforward answers to some of these questions. So when you're disclosing, if you're disclosing you have a disability, you explain that you have a disability or health condition and the changes or modifications that are needed in the interview. And that becomes the accommodation that you're requesting. You do not disclose the diagnosis or the details of your health condition. And the employer is not allowed to ask what your diagnosis or the details of your health condition is or are. Those things are personal. You only need to share that you have a disability or a health condition, and there are some modifications or accommodations you need in the interview. And if you need an accommodation to do your best, make sure you ask for one and explain that is why you need an accommodation, to present yourself in the most effective way possible. It's important to remember, it is important to remember that accommodations aren't extras. They let you excel in the interview. They let you present yourself in the best way possible so that the employer can have an accurate sense of how appropriate you would be for the job. So remember that you're not being hired for your interviewing skills, right? You're hired for your ability to do the job, which is why you need to be able to present yourself in the most effective manner during an interview. So ask what you need to communicate, or ask for what you need to communicate this. An easy example is if you do better with verbal interviews than written interviews, if written answers for whatever reason are a challenge related to some, to potentially a disability or a health condition, then explain that and ask for that modification. You'll know yourself best, so just consider what you need. So some accommodations, some, maybe more common accommodations.
Sorry, Donald, before you move on, can I just make a quick note here?
Of course.
For anyone who needs more in-depth support in terms of disclosure and accommodation, we did recently have a session with discoverability specifically on that topic. I will add the link to the captioned video in the chat. And for anyone watching the recording, we will make sure that the link to that is included in the description for this recording. Thank you.
All right, great resource. So common types of accommodations, or what kind of accommodations you can ask for, are changes or adjustments that address things like the type of interview. That was my example with the, maybe you present yourself better verbally than you do in written, or the length of the interview, as well as the timing. Scheduling an interview is obviously important. You want to make sure that you're able to make it and that you are going to be in good shape to present yourself. Whether or not you need breaks, if it's a long interview, or if there is a trial shift, right? Some interviews involve a trial shift, and that might be a few hours long. If there are tests involved, do you need additional time? Anyone who's worked with the Accessibility Services Center at the college would certainly be aware that it's not uncommon for people with, with say learning disabilities, for instance, to be provided extra time to complete tests. Is it useful for you to have the questions provided in written form or potentially in advance so that you have a chance to consider your answers if the interview is timed and maybe you're not, you're not as confident or good at providing answers in a timed setting without an opportunity to think about them? Not everybody is as good with spontaneity. Or large print, for instance, if maybe there's a vision impairment present. So the general idea here is to improve your interview content and be able to present it in an effective way. Now, in terms of requesting accommodations, like I said, you know yourself best, but you can also get assistance from people who are supporting you, just as you can get assistance from people who are supporting you to develop better content for your interviews. So a job coach or an employment counselor, or any number of people that are supporting you with your job search can help you determine appropriate interview questions to prepare for and potential answers that you might have for them. Such as, traditional questions. So I listed some of them. Why are you interested in this company? What makes you a good fit for this role? Behavioral questions. Tell me about a time you had a conflict with a coworker, and how you addressed it. Technical questions. What is 2 + 2? And testing. Which may give you scenarios or specific problems that you have to solve related to things you might be doing on the job. Your body language and tone of voice is really important. You want to sit with your back straight, shoulders up, not slouched. You want to make sure that you are smiling, that you are happy to be there, or at least that you look happy to be there, even if you're nervous, and make sure that you're enthusiastic in the way you're responding, that you don't sound frustrated or nervous as much as possible. And we may be nervous, but we need to mask that as much as we can. Your clothing is also important. You want to wear clean clothing, business casual, nothing with any stains or holes. Avoid distracting patterns and large, what's the word I'm looking for? Not just jewelry, large jewelry, large watches, accessories. That's the word I'm looking for. Avoid large distracting accessories as well. You really want the interviewer to be focused on your face. So consider that, and make sure that you have your references lined up. Make sure that you have let your references know that you're applying for jobs. And then when you get an interview, make sure you let them know you have an interview, so there may be a potential reference check afterwards. That way they're prepared. And that way, if your reference, if their contact information has changed, or they're not able to be a reference anymore, you know that before you provide your references to the interviewer. So I want to talk a bit about job coaches and employment service providers. These are organizations that provide support during your job search, and perhaps once you've even found work. Really, it's useful to have someone who is rooting for you, who helps alleviate the sense of loneliness and isolation. But it's also really useful if this person is familiar with the job search process and knows how to support you to be more successful in interviews and looking for work. So professional objective feedback is really important, because it's difficult for us sometimes to see what is or is not working. Or maybe, to be really blunt, it can be difficult for us to see what we're doing that is maybe not as effective. All right, we tend to be predisposed to being proud of the work that we do, and especially when we're putting a lot of effort into something, we are reticent to admit that maybe what we've done is not the most effective. So having someone who can provide objective feedback, and it's not criticism, but objective feedback on what could be better and maybe what's not working, is really useful. It's that whole second set of eyes, the third opinion outside of, or second opinion, outside opinion, that is really helpful, because other people will see things that we don't. And they can also help with your job search content, the way you write your resume, the material you include in interviews, and so on and so forth. So here are some common interview questions. We actually have a list of them on the screen. Tell me about yourself. What are your strengths and weaknesses? Why do you want to work here? Or what do you know about our company? Why should we hire you? Or why are you a good fit for this job? Tell me about a time you, and these are your situational questions, dealt with conflict, failed at a task, disagreed with your boss. I've mentioned some of these. Such and such is part of this job. Can you tell me how you would do it? Or do you require an accommodation to do this job? These are questions to be prepared for. I've already, I know I've gone through this a couple times, so I won't dwell on the point, but these are questions that you can have answers prepared for and be pretty confident that at least some of them are going to be posed to you. So the different types of interview questions, they're technical questions. I did give some examples of these. Make sure that your answers are prepared and that you use appropriate industry terminology and language. So technical questions, like I said, things like what is 2 + 2? No one's going to ask you that in a job interview, not really, but it gives you an example of what I'm talking about. They're going to be questions specifically related to what you need to do in a certain industry in which you're applying for a job. So listen to the question and make sure you understand. If you're not sure of something, ask for it to be rephrased or ask for an explanation of what is being asked for if you are not familiar with a term. I've done this in an interview and it really probably saved me, because otherwise I would have provided an answer that had nothing to do with the question that was asked. So focus on what you know best, or what you know, what you know and what you know best, and be honest. If you are maybe less familiar with something, be upfront about it, but then pivot your answer to something that you are familiar with, to a strength of yours. Always bring your answers back to strengths. You don't need to hide from what you don't know or what you're not familiar with or what you don't have experience with, but you always want to go back to your strengths, whether it's skills that you have that are related to what you need to do, or your ability to learn what is required of you. So prepare examples ahead of time, and use simple and obvious solutions. If you talk for too long during an answer, and maybe you start speaking in circles, or you're using solutions or examples that are not clear, then the interviewer may lose track of how you're answering the question. And I can understand the difficulty in this because I tend to speak a lot. So this is something I have to practice, is being a little more concise in my responses. If you can't answer a question during the interview, make a note of what you weren't able to respond to, and really for two reasons. One, you can address it in an interview follow-up. When you send an email to say, thank you for your time, and I appreciate the opportunity to have the interview, you can also say, there was a question I wasn't able to respond to, but I thought I'd provide you with the information now that I've had a little more time to think about it. However, this is also useful so that you are prepared to answer that question in the future. Even if you don't get that job initially, and you're applying for similar jobs, you may be asked the same question, so you will have an answer next time. There is also testing that might be done in an interview. Personally, I've only had this happen a couple times, but it does happen. And again, depending on the kind of job you're applying for, it may be more common type of the interview process than for other jobs. So the testing will determine whether you have the skills or the work style, the knowledge or the personality that aligns with the job or the organization or the culture that they're looking for. So there are hard skills assessments, such as a typing test. How fast do you type and how accurately? Soft skills assessments, these might be things like personality tests that look at your ability to perform as part of a team, your approach to interpersonal relations and communication with people. Job knowledge tests, which are going to obviously test your understanding of the job and what's required for it. Personality tests I've already mentioned, they would be sort of very common and included in soft skills assessments. Cognitive abilities, so standardized test forms looking at things like spatial recognition, mathematics, English, written communication, things like that. Emotional intelligence tests, which again are really getting back towards soft skills and interpersonal relations, your level of empathy and ability to understand other people's opinions or perspectives. Or physical ability tests for physically active jobs. This job requires you to lift 25 kilograms a day or 25 kilograms a day, right? 25 kilograms during a shift and many times a day. So maybe they'll have you perform that task, see how much you can lift or how far you can, whether or not you can carry a 25 kilogram box for the length of the warehouse or something like that. Body language, we already mentioned. You see some examples of not great body language on the screen. These people are all dressed appropriately. I did speak about apparel when I talked about body language, but this is the kind of body language you don't want. None of these people look engaged or interested. One of them looks like they're asleep, another is rolling their eyes. You want to be focused on the interviewer, making eye contact, as I said, back straight, smiling, and you want to look enthusiastic and engaged and make sure that you're paying attention and the interviewer can see that. Your clothing, you don't want to be wearing what is pictured on the left-hand side of the screen here. It should fit well, it should be comfortable, it should be professional as company employees dress. So look at a website or visit a location if you can beforehand and see what people are wearing. Now, there's a bit of a caveat to this. If you're going to say work on a construction site, or you're going to go interview for a construction job, you might not wear the kind of clothing you're going to wear to a construction site, right? I worked in construction. I can tell you when I went to those interviews, I didn't show up in boots, like the steel toe boots, and wearing a hard hat and some of the clothing I'd wear on a construction site. But I also didn't wear a suit and a tie, right? I wore appropriate apparel, jeans and a button-up shirt, but not a fancy button-up shirt, but the kind of, maybe like a denim button-up shirt or something that could potentially be worn on a site. So you have to make those considerations as well. Avoid footwear that shows your toes. Don't wear sandals or Crocs or anything like that. You don't want footwear that's too casual. You want to wear footwear that you might actually wear on the job, or at least that you would go for a walk in. So shoes, proper shoes, maybe dress shoes, depending on the location. Maybe you do want to wear boots. I don't know, but not flip-flops, wedge sandals, athletic shoes, and so on and so forth. And don't wear anything too revealing or distracting. So ripped jeans, tank tops, halter tops, strapless tops, dresses. I mentioned the large accessories, distracting graphics and designs that are going to have the interviewer looking at your clothing and not paying attention to your answers. Humorous ties or shirts. Again, you don't want to distract the interview from you. The interviewer should be paying attention to you, and your clothing should simply accentuate that. And don't wear athletic attire like yoga pants, right? You're not going there to exercise or go for a run. You're going there to interview. I see there's a question. How about sneakers? Are they appropriate for an office setting? So certainly they can be. And I think, again, you need to consider the type of sneakers. So I used to work at a shoe store, and I found out that I love really colorful shoes. So I have this great pair of shoes that are both shoes are different colors. One is orange and blue and pink, and the other is purple and red and something. Those sneakers would not be appropriate. Those sneakers would be very distracting and probably not what one would wear in an office setting. However, black sneakers or white sneakers, as long as the white sneakers are clean and not covered in dirt, those kinds of monochrome sneakers would be appropriate. So just make sure that you're considering that, right? You don't think you have to wear necessarily dress shoes to an office, but if you're going to wear sneakers, they do need to be appropriate and presentable. And presentable is really what you're looking for. So yeah, if you're going to wear sneakers to an interview and it's an office setting, I would say look at your solid black sneakers, solid white, make sure they're clean. Make sure they don't have, again, colors or designs or graphics on them, that they are just standard one color monotone sneakers. References are obviously a very important part of applying for jobs. These are people who are going to, they're going to provide you with an attestation of your skills and your appropriateness for the job. They're really going to basically tell an employer why they should hire you. You want to have 3 to 5 of them ready. And like I said, when you're applying for jobs, you want to let your references know you're applying for jobs. And when you get an interview, you want to let them know so they're aware that a reference check may be forthcoming. Because again, if you don't get a response from them, it may mean their contact information has changed, or that they can't be a reference for you anymore. So you want to make sure that your references are responsive. Share your resume with them beforehand if you're able to, so they know what you're presenting about yourself and what they say can be consistent. And if you have the opportunity to speak to them, ask them what they're going to say about you. Again, you want to make sure that their responses are consistent with what you're saying in the interview. Now, preparing questions to ask at the end of the interview. Here are some questions on the screen. I did share them a couple times, and I know Lacey shared a great resource with you, but here are some more examples. If I started tomorrow, what would my priorities be in the first 3 months? What do you believe are the greatest challenges for someone working in this role? What are the most important qualities that an employee should bring to this position? What are the next steps in this process? These are all additional very good examples of questions you can ask at the end of the interview. And then we have self-care. Right? Getting back to the very beginning of this presentation, talking about managing your mental health, the anxiety and stress of job searching. Stay connected to yourself, right? Make sure you know how you feel. Make sure that you can remain positive and energetic, that you're not giving yourself a schedule that is impossible for you to keep. You want to remain motivated and positive and enthusiastic. I do see there's a question, should we have letters of recommendation if possible at the time of the interview as well? So from my understanding, letters of recommendation are not asked for as much as they used to be. Having said that, if you have them, it can't hurt, right? I think the more you have, the better. So there's nothing wrong with having them. I have some of them. Sometimes when you ask people for references, they tell you they can't be a reference, but they can give you a letter of recommendation. So you should certainly take it in that case. But yes, you may as well have them. If you're asked for them, at least you have them. And if not, no harm was done. So better to be over-prepared than under-prepared. In terms of self-care, staying active is a great way to maintain a positive attitude and to feel good. Walking is the best exercise. It's the best exercise. If you can do half an hour of walking a day, and I mean getting your heart rate up for half an hour a day, you're going to get great benefits from that. It releases endorphins, which are a chemical which make you feel good. It's also just really good for your health. And in numerous studies that have been done, they found that walking for half an hour a day, an appropriate amount of cardiovascular exercise, is really almost as effective or as effective as the antidepressants that might be described. So exercise is the greatest medicine. Make sure that you are staying active. Take breaks during the job search process. As I said, you don't want to overwhelm yourself, so give yourself a chance to pause, to rest, to do other things that are not related to job searching and that are just pleasurable for you. You want to plan self-care, include it in your job search regimen, those breaks and those opportunities, and reframe how you think about your stress. Right, again, you don't want to be critical of yourself. You want to remain motivated. So make sure that you're thinking about the way you're approaching the job search and how you feel in a more positive and really respectful way of yourself. When you are thinking about job interviews, consider what that looks like to you, or what it may look like to the interviewer, right? It's a conversation between you and an employer to determine whether you want to work for the company and whether the company wants to hire you. Of course, we generally think about interviews as occasions where the employer's assessing us, but you're also assessing the employer, right? You also want to make sure that this is somewhere you want to work. So you've already been asked to interview if you're at a job interview, which means that the organization at least thinks you're qualified, or that you might be qualified and you might be a good candidate. So you should feel good about being in an interview. And then remember that it's a two-way conversation. Yes, you're answering most of the questions, but you'll get a sense of what they're looking for from the questions they're asking, as well as the kind of people they are based on how they ask those questions and the way they answer your questions at the end. And make sure you prepare. I know I've talked about this a lot, but being prepared will not only improve your responses and your chances of doing well, but you'll be more relaxed, you'll be more comfortable, you'll be more focused, because you won't be as worried about whether or not you have responses, pardon me, to the questions you're being asked. And then make sure you identify your negative thoughts and challenge them, or manage them properly, right? I'm not experienced should become I have valuable experience, or I have valuable abilities, despite potentially my less experience, right? You're applying for a job because you think you can do it. So that should be your starting point. And if you've been selected for an interview, then the employer thinks that you might be able to do it. And so that's also should be reinforcing in terms of positive thoughts when you go into an interview. Remember that you have abilities and remain focused on your abilities. You will be hired for your abilities and skills. You want to know your abilities as well as you know your disability, and stay ability focused. One of the employers I used to work with used to be the director of operations for Pizza Nova. His name is Ryan Shorten. He had a great quote when I was talking to him about this, and he said, focus on abilities first and disability second. So know what your abilities are and practice talking about them. Practice talking about your achievements, what you've accomplished and what you can accomplish. Again, if you need an accommodation to present yourself effectively, ask for it, and make sure that you are yourself, right? You want to be yourself, and unreservedly so. You'll get better with practice, and you'll be more comfortable if you're approaching things in this way. If it helps, create a pre-interview checklist for yourself and follow the steps that you've given yourself. Go to bed early and get a good night's sleep. If you like keeping a journal or it helps to write down your thoughts, then make sure you do so and end it on a positive note. Good hygiene is really important. This is not just a checklist thing. This is what you should do before an interview. Your teeth should be clean. Your hair should be washed and tidy, and you really shouldn't have any unpleasant body odor. So make sure you have that deodorant handy. Hydration in a meal before you eat. You don't want to be dehydrated or hungry, so make sure that you've had something to drink, something to eat. Visualize what success might look like. Imagine the questions that you might be asked and how you're going to respond. And then consider your interview kit. Have copies of your resume, up to 5 of them on hand. A copy of the job posting that you can reference. Maybe you can review it while you're waiting for the interview to start. Make sure you've done your company research and that you know what you want to refer to in terms of what you're aware of about the company. Have a notebook and a pen so you can take notes. You always want to be prepared to take notes in case there's any information you need to take away with you. And have your list of questions prepared for the end of the interview. If it helps, if you like meditative practices in order to help you relax, then do some deep breathing or a power pose in a private space before entering the office. And a power pose might be something like the Superman pose with your hands on your hips, where again, studies have actually shown that doing that even for 2 minutes a day can improve self-confidence. So those sorts of things. Whatever you need to do, make sure that you do it so that you're as prepared and feeling as good as you can before an interview. You want to arrive early, not too early. You don't want to be there 2 hours early, but 15 minutes early is generally pretty good. Again, visualize how you're going to feel when the interview is over. You've done it. Even if you don't get the job, it's good experience and good practice, and you'll have a better sense of what to expect in the future. When you meet the interviewer, make sure you introduce yourself, even though they know your name. Introduce yourself, shake their hand, and offer everyone who's there a copy of your resume in case they don't have it. It's okay to be anxious, right? You don't need to pretend like you're not, you don't need to try and ignore it in the sense that telling yourself that you don't have any nervousness. You may be nervous, that's fine. Redirect that energy into a positive place, right? Accept that you're nervous, take that energy and make sure that it keeps you focused very specifically on your performance and what you're doing there. Take your time with your answers. You don't need to rush through. If you want time to think about it, just let the interviewers know. Just give me a moment. I need to think about that before I respond, and ask the questions for questions you're not sure of to be reworded or reframed so that you can understand them, or ask for clarification on terms you're not familiar with. And always thank the interviewers for their time and ask what the next steps are. Always be polite, always show gratitude. After the interview, you want to reward yourself, whatever that may look like. Something simple. Within 24 hours, you want to send them a thank you note or an email just to show that you appreciated being there and keep you on their radar. Make sure that they're still thinking about you. And then in 2 weeks, if you haven't heard from them, you want to follow up, right? Follow up and ask them, whether or not there is any process with the reviewing of your application. So the key takeaways from this workshop: job search intensity is related to receiving more offers and finding jobs faster. But remember, you also want to manage your time. Mobilizing your social networks and your job search supports, such as a job coach, employment counselor, services within the college, can play an important and helpful role in job search success, as well as keeping you motivated and ensure that you have the best content possible available and ready for your interviews. And self-care is as critical to the interview and job search success as increasing the time and effort you put into job searching and improving the content of your interview. You want to feel good about yourself. You want to feel healthy. You want to be well rested. You want to be in a good mood, and you're going to present yourself more positively and enthusiastically if that's the case. When it comes to job searching, we invite you to join the Discoverability Network. Again, we think we can be a powerful job search tool in your job search toolkit. You can create your free profile on the site anytime you like. It's very straightforward. And once you've created a profile and specified your job interests, you will start being matched to jobs that match your interests and that you have some qualification for, and then you can decide which jobs to apply to. So it becomes a very useful job search tool that basically throws job opportunities at you that you can then choose which ones to apply to. So very, very easy to use and quite useful. You see our socials. We invite you to follow us, follow up with our teammates if you like, if you have any questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and invite people to ask any questions they may have, anything that didn't come up during the presentation. I don't know if we want to stop the recording in case people do have questions they didn't want to ask on camera, so to speak.
Yes, I was just going to ask if anybody has questions, but they would rather do it off the recording. Feel free to just put a thumbs up in the chat and I will do my closing out so that we can stop the recording and then we can get to the questions after it has stopped. Okay, I don't see anything in the chat. So if there are folks who still have questions, oh, we do have one from Christina.
Let's see what that is.
Would a digital portfolio suffice as a resume, or is it always recommended to have some sort of hard copy? Also, what is an appropriate length? Are 2-pagers still frowned upon?
So a couple things. I think it's always useful to have hard copies. Don't assume that everything should be digital. And also, you know, as someone who, let's just be honest, technology doesn't always work. If you go only with the digital copy and the device you have it on fails or decides that when you turn it on to show your resume is when it has to install some sort of update that prevents you from using it or any other number of things, maybe the internet connection isn't great and you need internet access, then you're going to be stuck. So having a digital copy is certainly a good idea, but you should also have hard copies with you, especially if you're presenting. If you're giving a copy of your resume to multiple interviewers, you are probably not going to be able to give them multiple devices, and they may not have devices they can view it on. Appropriate length of a resume, from my understanding, 2 pages is generally what you're looking for. You certainly don't want to get too much longer than that if you can avoid it, because the longer a resume is, the less likely somebody is to get through all of it. Right? Employers get a lot of applications, a lot of resumes to review, and you want to make sure that they actually read your resume. So 2 pages is generally a length you want to stick to. What kind of weaknesses should we mention? Well, that is a tricky question. I know a common question in interviews is, you know, what are areas of improvement that you might have? They may not phrase it as weaknesses. If you're going to mention weaknesses, the best advice I can give you is basically find a way to turn that question on its head and talk about strengths. So an example of what I mean is, you know, tell me about something you could improve on. Well, I am my own harshest critic. I have really high standards for myself. I expect myself to perform well. And I think sometimes I need to give myself, you know, a little bit more, you know, need to be a little more understanding with myself that things aren't always going to be perfect, or something to that extent, you know, or, you know, I have a really good work ethic, and sometimes I work too long or I work too hard, and that can impact my ability to, you know, to really achieve a good work-life balance. So I need to, you know, manage my self-care a little better, or something like that, right? So in those examples I gave, you're talking about how you have high standards for your work, which is telling the employer that you're going to perform to a high standard for them, or that you maybe work too hard sometimes, so you're going to be very focused on your work. Anytime you're asked about weaknesses or areas for improvement, you want to, as much as possible, take it as an opportunity to speak about strengths, even if it's in sort of a reverse fashion. Oh, Christina, I see. I always thought it was supposed to be a 1-pager. No, not that. Definitely not 1 page. You know, depending on your experience, maybe 1 page is all you need. But as soon as you get some working experience, 2 pages is what you're going to be looking at. And as you get more work experience, what you're going to find is the challenge becomes what to include in those 2 pages, but definitely 2 pages. I have weakness of impatience. How should I rephrase it? That is not one I had to use. Give me a moment. I mean, so I can't, generally, if I was working with you as a job coach, I would take more time to think about this and have a conversation with you and practice it and work that out. So don't take what I'm about to say as exactly what you should do. Okay, I want to be clear. If you're working with a job coach or someone like that, they would take more time to help you with this. But how you might rephrase that is, you know, I have expectation. Now, I don't know what you mean by impatience as well, right? Again, if I was your job coach, I'd have a better understanding of what you mean by that. But it could be something along the lines of, I expect myself to complete my work within a certain time frame. I expect to get it done in good time, and I become impatient with myself if I think I'm taking too long to complete a task. So I always try very hard to get it done within the time that I expect of myself. I could learn to be more patient with myself, knowing that it's okay to maybe take a bit longer as long as I get it done on time and effectively. So that might be one example of the way you'd rephrase it. But I would suggest, consider what you mean by impatience, and maybe speak to somebody, whether it's a career counselor in George Brown, or maybe there's a job coach or employment services organization you're with, or someone whether it's a friend or a family member, who you can sort of bounce ideas off of and practice that, so that you're reframing it in a way that, again, sort of reflects strengths, but also speaks to exactly what you mean by impatience. So that's the best example I can give you on the spot without having more information and more time. Oh, you're welcome. Are there any other questions anybody would like to ask? Or if there are questions you want to ask outside of the recording, feel free to say so, and we can always stop the recording so you can ask those questions.
Donald, I think in the interest of time, I'm just going to do my quick closeout while maybe folks are thinking about their questions. And then if there are further questions that folks have, we'll stay on for a couple more minutes to address any of those remaining ones. So, I mean, first of all, thank you so much, Donald, and the whole discoverability team for this amazing information and guidance. I know we have many students who are either looking for part-time work, getting ready to go into their co-ops, or finishing their program next month and getting ready for that transition. So this is so timely and really coming from an empowering standpoint. So thank you for that. I want to thank everyone for joining today, and to Heather Goodman for the ASL interpretation. Thank you. If anyone is interested in watching this session again, we will be sending out the recording after we have the session captioned. So be sure to check out Discoverability on their website. The links are all there. As well, if you're interested in any of the other sessions that we have hosted with Discoverability, we have our past recordings on our Career Services YouTube channel, and their upcoming sessions with us are posted on GB Careers. So if you want to register for those, by all means, that's where you can go and find the registration link. So with that, I'm going to say bye for now. See you next time. And I'm going to stop the recording so that we can get to any remaining questions. Thanks a lot, everyone.